I have always preferred living alone. No wife, no roommates, and most importantly, no kids. I wanted a cat or dog, but still hadn't gotten over the death of my last one. That all changed one day when I was taking an evening walk and, in a dark alleyway, I saw a crying child. I looked around hoping this wasn't some kind of trap and finally approached her. "Hey there, kiddo, what's the matter?" She stopped crying and looked up at me. "I don't know what to do. I don't want to go home where they're all mean to me, but I'm scared and hungry." I offered to take her across the street to the gas station to get a sandwich, to which she stopped crying and silently joined my side, still sobbing and scared. After getting a sandwich that she enthusiastically devoured, I took her to the police station. She said her name was Lilith, she was 10 years old, and upon research the state had no records of her parents or past. They wanted to put her in an orphanage, but she clenched to my side. "No, I want to stay with him. He fed me, and he was nice to me." This poor girl acts like she never knew an act of kindness a day in her life. I didn't know how to take care of a child, but something akin to guilt came washing over me. The next day consisted of getting inspected and ultimately being deemed parent certified when they found out I had a good work-from-home job. Lilith, who I now call Lily, took to the house immediately. She liked looking in the fish tank of my aquarium. She was excited to have her own bedroom, and she loved running out in the yard. One thing about her I noticed is that this girl eats like there is no tomorrow. Oddly enough, she wasn't skin and bones when I met her, but she doesn't even have a trace of fat you would expect most kids her age to have. She looked like a mini adult. After eating 3 sandwiches and a bowl of ramen, she went to take a nap. I still haven't totally adjusted to having another living being other than fish and plants in the house. But she brought nice energy, and her always being hungry reminded me to eat something myself. I made a note to do something soon, otherwise she was going to bankrupt my grocery bill. I decided to take her out on a walk around the park area, hoping she would get tired and sleep easy tonight. To this day I regret doing this. On the walking path, a deer walked in front of us. "What is that? Have you not seen a deer before? Is it edible?" "Yes, actually, though I don't eat them." Lily then walked up, even though I told her it might be dangerous. I then watched in horror as she transformed into something not human. A horizontal line formed on her stomach that opened to a large mouth filled with rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth. Black corvid-like wings protruded from her back, and a dark circle dripping some kind of black ooze formed over her head. A large tongue like the tentacle of a squid wrapped around the deer and pulled it in. Blood splattered, and bone crushed as she chowed on the deer like it was a candy bar. Then, like nothing happened, she turned back into her human form. "That was delicious," I heard her say, having no reaction myself except trying not to faint from the gruesome horror I had witnessed. "We should go home, Dad. You don't look so good." From that point on, I was afraid. Feeding her felt more like I was making an offering to a malevolent deity. And one night I woke up at 3 a.m. to which my blood ran cold when I saw her at the foot of my bed. "Dad, I'm hungry." I got up and made her 2 ham sandwiches. To avoid losing all my food in 3 days and keeping my bill down, I had to resort to more drastic measures. We would go on walks in the woods where we would go deer hunting, and I would let her eat her fill before returning home. On days when we couldn't find deer, I would take her to the rancher when I knew the farmer wasn't home and let her eat a whole cow. With the mess that got left behind, they always rule it up to an animal attack. The thing that got me the most is that when she's not acting like a voracious monster, she was the happiest little girl in the world. She loved having her hair brushed, making daisy chains, and I even bought a Switch so we could play Smash Brothers together. I really enjoyed having her around, maybe because I was too lonely before. One evening we went on a night walk in town, and we were stopped on the sidewalk. One man was in front of us with a crowbar. Well, look at that. He then had an accomplice with a switchblade behind us. "Make this easy on yourself, pal, and leave the girl." I was once again afraid not just of the men but of something happening to Lily. I didn't notice when one of the men walked up to me and whacked my knee with a crowbar. "Dad!" I heard Lily yell as blood rang through my ears and pain shot through my knee. He grabbed her by the arm, and she transformed. Wait, the hell? I heard the man yell as she coiled her tongue around his leg and dragged him into her maw like he was livestock. His friend tried to run for it, but she devoured him as well. His screams must have lit up the silent night ambience, but I was in too much pain. My world was spinning, my hearing was muffled, and my vision was blurring. Finally, I came out of it long enough to pull the phone out of my pocket and call an ambulance. Sweetie, if the cops asked you what happened or anyone asked, I was hit by a speeding car. She nodded, and moments later the ambulance arrived to take me to the hospital. After getting a cast and some crutches, I was allowed to return home. I'm glad my job was work from home, so I didn't have to worry about a babysitter, and I was going to homeschool her when the season started. I told her never to transform in front of other people and to never eat another human being again. She agreed to all of it. One night I walked outside and saw her staring at the sky. Hey, sweet pea, what are you looking at? What are those lights in the sky? Those are stars, sweetie. They look delicious. I hope one day I can go up there and eat every last star. I know you will one day, sweetie. I'm still terrified of her, and yeah, I know I live with a monster. But when you love someone, you look past the flaws. She gave me someone to work hard for, and I love her. And she loved me, I think, or at least I hope. I met my girlfriend, Victoria, 7 months ago in a bar. We felt an instant connection and started dating 3 days later. She brought nothing but happiness, the perfect definition of a soulmate. So when I graduated from university, we both agreed to move in together. She's 2 years older than me and was already working, so I moved into her house. However, after moving in, everything went downhill. The first incident happened on the first night of moving in. Victoria works night shift, so she was getting ready to head out. Babe, I'm off to work now. Just to tell you again, the neighbors next door get a little cranky at night, so just ignore them, she said sweetly. Yeah, I get it, I responded. I gave her a kiss goodbye and she left, leaving me alone in her house. I sat down on the kitchen table and got to work. For context, I work remotely as a character designer for a video game company. It was peaceful for a few hours until the clock hit 2 a.m. The cranky neighbors began screaming profusely. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but it sounded like an intense argument. I tried ignoring it for a while, but eventually the sound became unbearable. Banging was heard on the walls, glass shattering on the floor, followed by more screaming and arguing. So much so that it sounded like multiple voices overlapping each other. I tried blasting music in my headphones, but that didn't help. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, so I called it a night and stopped working. The next day passed by in a flash. I chose not to tell Victoria about the neighbors since it was apparently normal, and I didn't want her to think that it bothered me so much. It was her house after all. Nighttime came and I was watching TV in the sofa when the arguments from the neighbors came again. Thumping, glass shattering, furniture being thrown around. You'd think their house is a WWE ring. Jesus Christ, I muttered to myself. Suddenly, I started hearing banging on the door, followed by a blood-curdling scream. What the fuck? I said while pausing the movie I was watching. The neighbor was trying to break into the house. That's it. That was the last straw. I got up and went to the back door where the banging and screaming was being heard. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen table in case the man would break the door. Thank God it was locked. Just in case, I leaned against it, each punch crushing my back. My heart was racing, my hands were shaking. I didn't know what to do. For all I knew, the man could seriously hurt me. It felt like an eternity before what I'm assuming is a man stopped banging the door. Concurrently, the screaming stopped, and it was silent. The fuck? I muttered under my breath. There was no way I was going to live in these conditions. I decided that I was going to confront Victoria about it when she got home. With that in mind, I made sure all the doors were locked, windows shut, and went to bed. A few hours later at 6 a.m., my girlfriend got home and laid down in the bed next to me. She hugged me from behind and gave me a kiss on the nape, waking me up. "How's everything?" she asked softly. "Were the neighbors loud?" I grunted and turned my head to face her, rubbing my eyes. "What?" Victoria giggled. "How did it go with the neighbors?" I found it strange that she asked me that today but not yesterday. Maybe it was me being tired. "The husband tried breaking in," I said. "He banged on the door for at least 2 minutes, screaming. I thought that was the end for me. Seriously, Victoria, I don't think this house is safe for us to live in. As long as the door is locked, you should be fine." She smiled sweetly. I gave Victoria a serious look. "Listen, I can't live with these conditions." I tried to say it as nicely as possible. "I didn't even feel safe in this house last night. You're telling me this is going to happen every single night?" Victoria looked down, her eyelids drooping down in discomfort. I felt sorry blaming her for something that wasn't her fault, but we obviously needed to do something about it. I can't fear for my life every night. "I'll call the wife tonight and see if anything can be done." She hugged me tightly. "Okay?" I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Thank you, baby. I know it's not your fault, but it's impossible to live in fear in my own house every night." On the following evening, Victoria left for her night shift. Once again, I was left alone in her house. She texted me around 15 minutes later, telling me that the problem was solved and that it should be better tonight. I thanked her and laid down on the sofa to wind down. I ended up falling asleep while watching a movie. I woke up a few hours later at 4 a.m. to screaming from the psychotic neighbors once again. Furious, I got out of bed and prepared myself for confrontation. I was ready to finally get to the bottom of this. However, as I walked closer to the front door, something felt off. I noticed the voices and banging a little closer than usual, as if they were in the same house. It was the first time I ever paid attention to where the sound was truly coming from, but it was still unexpected. Subtle, but unexpected. Following the traces of sound, the screams didn't take me to the front entrance, or to the house next door. They took me to the basement door, the only part of the house I haven't gone into yet. My heart began racing. This has to be my hallucinations. The sounds can't be coming from my girlfriend's basement, right? With my legs trembling, I tried to push the basement door open, but it was locked. It only resulted in even louder screams coming from downstairs. They sounded like a cry for help. "What the fuck is down there?" I muttered. The thought alone sent shivers down my spine. Thankfully, or unthankfully, my uncle taught me lock-picking when I was younger in case I was in a dangerous situation where I needed it. Thanks, Uncle Will. So if there has ever been an opportunity to use that skill, it would be now. I took 2 paper clips and started fidgeting them inside of the lock. In just a few minutes, the door unlocked, but it still wouldn't open. I looked around the house for anything I could use, until I found a crowbar. Using all my might, I pushed the door open. Looking back, I wish I hadn't. Instantly, I heard loud, blood-curdling screams piercing my ears. Screams that you would only hear in horror movies. Covering my ears, I forced my way downstairs. What I saw was horrific. Dead bodies of dozens of guys were organized in a line on the floor across the basement. Worst of all, every guy that looked to be around my age, many looking like the exes Victoria had talked about in passing. Above them was a jar. Inside it looked to be their faces with a large glow surrounding them. They were screaming in absolute, agonizing pain. From what I saw, it looked to be their souls. The sealed, trapped souls of innocent men facing endless pain in their afterlife. The stench was unbearable. Their bodies were bled out, as if everything inside of these men were sucked out to leave only their pure skin. Despite that, their faces were somewhat recognizable, each body neatly placed to keep its original shape. Their names were written in blood in front of each body. Jack, Noah, Michael, etc. Their screams sounded more like loud gasps from up close. The room was so loud I was getting dizzy. The screams only got louder. It sounded loud enough to screech into my brain. My mind went blank, my body shaking at the thought that this was my girlfriend's creation. It got even worse when I got to the end. Another name written in blood, with no body behind it, as if it was still being prepared, Dylan. That was my name. I then got a notification on my phone. A message from Victoria. My heart stopped just by reading it. "Hey babe, on my way home. Sorry about yesterday. Let's have some fun tonight." I don't believe in the supernatural. Never have, never will. But everything the last few days has me questioning everything. I haven't slept, I haven't eaten, I haven't left my house. Yet I fear she will get me anyway. Let me start at the beginning. I was driving home from a friend's party 3 days ago. I'd stayed late, and it was already dark out. And then something caught my eye. On the 3rd floor of an old Victorian house, the light was on. In the window, I saw a shape. The shape of a woman hanging upside down. It was as if her feet were somehow tied to the ceiling, and she was hanging upside down in midair. Her arms somehow hung naturally at her sides, defying gravity. But her hair hung straight down from her head, ending in little wispy threads. No detail, just a silhouette. As soon as I recognized it, I was already past the house. So I turned around and drove past it again. This time, I only saw some rumpled curtains with tassels and a lamp in the window, which, maybe if you squinted real hard, could look like a woman hanging upside down. I shook my head and kept driving home. I'd had a lot of pareidolia jump scares like this. Pareidolia is our brain's tendency to see faces and shapes in randomness, like how we see clouds that look like animals, or knots of wood that look like faces. Sometimes, I think I have an overactive sense of pareidolia. For example, years ago, when I got bangs cut for the first time, I started seeing shadow people. It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize the shadow people was hair falling into my eyes, that my brain was interpreting as some sort of demon or spirit. So I didn't give the upside-down woman much thought. Until I saw her again. I was on the subway into work. Lights caught my eye, out the window, as another subway passed us in the opposite direction. I looked up, and there she was. The silhouette of a woman, hanging upside down, in the passing subway car. Pressed against the window, blurred by the speed of the train. I only saw her for a split second, and then she was gone, as the train rattled past us. What the fuck? I must have just seen, like, a black jacket draped over a seat, or something, right? My heart began to pound. I stared out the window for the rest of my commute. But all the other passing subways were fine, filled with commuters staring at their phones. When I got out at the station, my legs were so weak, I thought I might collapse. But I forced myself to work. I didn't see anything strange on the way back from work, either. When I got home, I tried to distract myself, binging the nastiest stuff on HBO and plowing through an entire bag of chips. Then I finally went to sleep, only to wake up with a start at 3:03 a.m. I was covered in a film of cold sweat. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't remember any dream. Usually when I woke up like this, the vestiges of some nightmare were still in my head. This time, there was nothing. I rolled over, pulling the covers up to my chin, and closed my eyes. Wait. There was something in the darkness of my room that didn't look quite right. I opened my eyes and looked around the room, my heart hammering. The dark shapes of my nightstand, my bookshelves, came into focus. Everything was where it should be, except for the light. It was too dark in here. I rolled back over, towards my window, and realized that the usual annoying light from the street lamp below was not shining through the curtains. I got out of bed, slowly, and made my way to the window. I pulled back the curtains. My knees buckled underneath me. She was hanging from the roof. Her feet were tied to the awning of the roof, right in front of my window. Her arms hung loosely from her shoulders. Her hair hung straight down, waving gently in the breeze. Actually, her entire body was waving gently in the breeze. I grabbed the curtains and pulled them shut. I ran over to the light. Then I tiptoed back to the window and peeked out a tiny slit between the curtains. No. She was gone. I saw the street lamp, the night sky dotted with stars. The next morning, I tried to tell myself it was a dream. I'd had a few weird moments in my life, in the twilight between dreaming and wake. Sleep is a weird, hallucinogenic continuum, and who was to say I hadn't imagined the woman out my window? Deep down, I knew that wasn't true, but it was a pretty little lie. I made my way to work shaken. I didn't look up at passing subway cars. I drank about 3 cups of coffee. Jeff, ever the charmer, told me I looked super tired, and Tina asked me if I was sick. I didn't tell them what happened. They wouldn't believe me. When I got home, I started searching online for what I'd seen. I found myself scouring urban legend forums, and even old posts here on No Sleep, the kinds of places I only visited briefly when I saw the shadow people, or when I was looking for a laugh. Now, I wasn't laughing. I was desperately searching for an answer to whatever this was. And then, finally, I found it. Someone claimed their friend had seen the upside-down woman and had died 4 days later. Stay away from windows, they warned. It can only manifest in windows. They also remarked that their friend had at first seen the woman through 2 layers of glass, like through a car window, into the window of a home, and then, later, through only 1 window. Like it was getting closer. Some science person had replied, asking all kinds of ridiculous questions, like if plastic counts, or any transparent material, and they replied, there has to be a pane of glass, or glass-like material, in front of the person. They did not explain glass-like any further. There was no way to avoid windows, unless I lived in the basement. So I moved food, water, and clothing down there while half closing my eyes. I told my boss I was sick. Oh yeah, Tina told me you looked sick. Hope it's not COVID. It took me a long time, but then I was settled in. For how long, I didn't know. I didn't know if it was even possible to wait out the upside-down woman. And I didn't even know if I actually believed in her existence in the first place. That was about to change. I decided to get some reading done to get my mind off things. I grabbed my book and, without thinking, grabbed my reading glasses. As soon as I put them on, I screamed. She was hanging from the basement ceiling, hanging in the corner, a void of darkness, hair nearly trailing to the floor. And then, this time, she moved. In jerky, incredibly fast motions, she broke free from the ceiling and scrambled towards me. I ripped the glasses off my face, but not before pain exploded in my arm. When I looked down, there were 4 deep scratch marks on my forearm, dripping blood. That leaves me here. I am sitting in my basement, away from all windows and glass, on the 3rd day. According to the guy on the internet, his friend was killed the 4th day. I don't know what will happen after 4 days. If that means I've waited her out, and she'll move on to another target, or if she'll kill me anyway, glass or not. If you don't hear from me in 24 hours, assume the worst. To anyone who finds this message, my name doesn't matter, but my story might. I am, or rather, I was a lead engineer at a top-secret research facility deep beneath the ice of Antarctica. Our mission was simple: to explore and harness the power of an ancient technology buried miles below the frozen surface. What we discovered was something that should never have been awakened. The project, known as Obsidian, a codename we now know was more fitting than we ever realized, began with the discovery of a massive, perfectly preserved structure detected via satellite scans. This structure, buried under 4 miles of solid ice, was unlike anything on Earth, an impossibly smooth, obsidian black pyramid emitting faint electromagnetic pulses. In December 2021, my team was dispatched to the site with cutting-edge drilling equipment to breach the ice and gain access. The project was classified at the highest levels of global security. Only a handful of people even knew it existed. As we tunneled closer, the pulses grew stronger, and our instruments started behaving erratically. Computers failed, compasses spun wildly, and even our most advanced communications systems flickered and died. On January 10th, 2022, we finally reached the pyramid's surface. The surrounding ice had an unnatural, almost glossy sheen, and the air grew thick with static electricity. Ignoring every instinct, we set up our equipment and prepared to enter. The entrance was sealed with a door made from a material that defied all analysis, either metal nor stone. It absorbed all light, rendering it nearly invisible to the naked eye. When we finally breached it, we found an empty chamber lined with glyphs that emitted a dim, pulsating glow. At the center of the room stood a large, perfectly circular hole descending into darkness. It was around this point that things began to spiral out of control. Without warning, the glyphs started to pulse faster, and an oppressive force filled the chamber, pressing down on us as if the air itself had turned to lead. We attempted to retreat, but the hole began to emit a low, thrumming noise, a sound that resonated deep within our bones. As we watched, paralyzed with terror, something began to rise from the depths. A shape of a void, darker than the darkest night, emerged from the hole. It was amorphous, shifting, and yet there was a terrifying sense of intelligence behind it. It filled the room with an overwhelming presence, a crushing sense of despair and doom. The surrounding air warped and twisted as the entity began to take a vaguely humanoid form. We couldn't move, couldn't speak. The only sound was the relentless hum, growing louder and more unbearable with each passing second. Then, in a voice that bypassed our ears and spoke directly into our minds, it said, "You have trespassed into the domain of the eternal void. You are the first to awaken us in eons, and for this, your world will suffer. We are the ones who came before, and we shall reclaim what was lost. You cannot stop what has begun." The entity dissipated into the air, leaving us with a chilling coldness that seeped into our very souls. We fled, abandoning all equipment and sealing the entrance behind us, but it was too late. The pyramid began to emit pulses of energy at an ever-increasing rate, and we realized, with dawning horror, that it was a beacon, a call to something far beyond our comprehension. As I write this, I am the last surviving member of my team. The others are gone, vanished without a trace, consumed by whatever we unleashed. The facility is on lockdown, but I fear it's only a matter of time before the energy pulses reach their peak and whatever lies on the other side answers the call. I don't know how much longer I have, but you need to understand this isn't just a threat to us, but to all of humanity. Do not attempt to access the obsidian pyramid. Do not go near it. Know that the end we have set in motion cannot be undone. If you receive this, pray that it's not too late. When I was in high school, my girlfriend and I would go to the mall a lot. It wasn't something I enjoyed very much, but it made her happy, so I didn't complain. Every time we went, she would make us get our pictures taken in those photo booth things. You know, the ones where you put in 2 quarters or whatever and get a strip of pictures taken and print it off. It was kind of a ritual. She kept the best one from each visit in her locker. One time, we went and the booth was taped off. I guess someone thought it would be funny to use it to take pictures of his dick, and then leave the strip, covered in his semen, no less, in the booth. The parents of the little girl who went in next were not amused, and the mall was going to be taking it out. I think that's an overreaction, but expected nowadays. Well, my girlfriend was pretty sad about not being able to get our pictures taken like usual, so we ended up just wandering aimlessly. She didn't really want to leave, but she didn't feel like shopping either. I bought us some ice cream, hoping it would cheer her up, but she still was pretty depressed. Eventually, we ended up at the far end of the 2nd floor. We almost never got over there, as there weren't many stores either of us were interested in. but today we did. I noticed that there was an arcade there, and that got me thinking. They tend to have a photo booth in them. I didn't want to say anything about that, to avoid getting my girlfriend's hopes up, but I managed to convince her to go in. It was noisy inside, but mostly just from the games. There were only a few other kids inside, and the owner sitting at a small desk watching some sports game on TV. We walked around the place and didn't see a booth. Saddened a bit, I suggested that we go, and she started to say that she agreed when her sentence drifted off. I looked where she was looking, and tucked back in a corner there was a machine that said, "Instantly developed photos," peeking over one of the games. We nearly ran over to it, but were disheartened to find that it too was taped off. My girlfriend was really sad now, and suggested that we leave the mall now. I hated seeing her like this, and I thought to myself, you know what? Almost no one is in here, and none of them are paying attention to us. So I went over, plugged in the booth, and pulled the tape down. At first she was shocked that I would do that, but then the joy at being able to carry on our tradition overtook her. One thing that was incredibly obvious about this booth was that it was much older than the one that we usually went to. It was beaten up, didn't have a touchscreen menu, and only cost 10 cents a strip. We decided to do a double strip, since it would still be cheaper than one of our normal ones. We put in 2 dimes, and then it took our pictures. When the last one was done, we looked and saw that there wasn't a slot for them to be printed on the inside. It was odd, but I guess back when this thing was made they didn't think to have them print on the inside. So we got out and looked at the sides of the booth, and found the pictures. There wasn't much light inside the arcade, so my girlfriend picked them up and we were walking outside to see them better when we realized something. There was no sound anymore. All the games were running, but it was like someone hit the mute button on all of them. It creeped my girlfriend out, and I'll admit I was unnerved as well. So we walked towards the exit a little faster, but we couldn't find it. Every corner we took just led us to another row of arcade games, with flashing lights and no sound. Now we were both panicking, but I managed to be rational enough to figure out that if I climbed on top of one of the machines, I would be able to get a view of the room. I went over to one and asked my girlfriend to give me a little support as I climbed it. I got on top and saw that somehow we had gone further into the arcade. The exit was on the other side. I told her, and she calmed down a bit. I was trying to get down from the game when I thought something brushed my hand. I screamed and fell. My girlfriend tried to catch me, but I just knocked her into the machine and fell onto the floor. I wasn't hurt badly, and I got up to tell her I was sorry. When I turned to look at her, I saw she was staring at the screen and shaking. I walked over beside her and saw that it no longer was showing the menu. No, flashing in old-fashioned arcade game letters was the message, "Player 2 has no more lives." I told her that I must have started a game when I climbed up, but she shook her head no and whispered, "Look around." Every game was flashing the same words. That really freaked us out, so we started running in the direction of the exit. We went around turns and turns of games, and it seemed we had been running far too long to have covered less distance than is contained in a shop in a mall. But now we could see it. 7 rows of games ahead. Rising above them all was the exit sign. We stopped for a moment when we saw it, relieved and catching our breath. Then my girlfriend screamed. She spun around to look behind her and screamed that something had just touched her hair. We looked around but saw nothing. No one was near us, but there was something worse than the presence of someone else. The screens now all showed the words, "Player 1 has no more lives." That was it. We were sprinting faster than we ever had before, running towards the exit sign. We just had to get around 3 more rows and we would be out of the arcade. And then we saw something that brought us to a halt. There was someone standing at one of the games. He was one of the kids we had seen earlier. When we came in, I recognized the clothes, even though I hadn't paid much attention to him before. He was just standing there, playing a game. After the shock of seeing someone else had passed, I thought I should call out to him. "Hey dude." My girlfriend grabbed my arm and shushed me. "Don't," she whispered harshly in my ear. "Why not? What's the matter?" "Something doesn't feel right. Let's just keep going. We're almost out." So we walked past him, hugging the other side of the row of games. Something seemed wrong with him, in the glow of the lights. I stopped walking and just looked at him. My girlfriend begged me to keep going, but I had to figure out what was wrong. I took a few steps closer, and it hit me. His hands were on the controls, The game was playing, but he wasn't moving at all. I walked closer and closer, all the while my girlfriend was crying and begging for me to go back to her. I got to him, touched him on the shoulder, and shivered from how freezing cold he was. I asked if he was okay and walked beside him to get a look at his face. His throat was slit and his skin was paper white. I screamed so loud and so intensely that I hurt my voice. I turned back to my girlfriend and started to run to her. When I saw that someone holding a hand over her mouth and a knife to her throat, I couldn't see the face, but the figure's hands looked like a man's. I shouted at him, "Let her go." The response was a laugh, deep and gurgling. I tried to lunge at him, to get the knife away from her throat, but I wasn't fast enough. He slit her open in one fluid motion. Blood sprayed out all over me, and I was frozen in shock. He dropped her body and brought the knife to his face. It was still shrouded in darkness, but I saw a tongue come out and lick the knife. That tongue, it wasn't human. It looked more like a giraffe's, long and thin. I was crying now and couldn't think. Then he pointed at me and said, "You wait there. You next." That voice, it was horrible. It was like two rough stones being dragged across each other. But what came next was worse. He bent down to my girlfriend's body and started sucking in the fatal wound. His mouth covered her entire neck, and it made a horrifying squelching sound as he sucked the blood from her. I couldn't think, couldn't react with anything but more tears and a sighing cry. And then the noises started to stop. He pulled back, and his mouth was extended like a trunk, and it began to pull back into his face. When it was back to normal, that tongue came out again and licked the traces of blood off his lips. He pulled the knife out again and started advancing towards me. Part of me wanted to let him kill me. I didn't want to live with these memories, but that part of my mind was overridden by a more primitive section. The adrenaline poured out into my body, and I ran. I didn't even know what was happening anymore. I just ran. Somehow I managed to make it to the exit. As I ran, I saw the owner still sitting at his TV, now blank, and some still active part of my mind realized that his skin was far too pale, and that there was a black line running along his neck. But I caught all of that in the few seconds before bursting out of the door and running into a woman outside of the arcade. I frantically screamed, begging her to call the police, the paramedics, anyone. She screamed too. At first I thought because I seemed crazy. Then I realized that I had blood all over me. My girlfriend's blood. Eventually security came, and the woman told them I had come from inside the arcade. One of them stayed with me, and the other two went inside. They came back out and told the man with me to handcuff me while they contacted the police. What they had found was my girlfriend's body, throat slit, drained of blood. This was expected. I had seen her die. What I didn't expect was that hers was the only one. Nor did I expect it to be found in the photo booth. But the worst part, the piece of evidence that I can never comprehend, the reason that my mind was broken to the point I was considered incompetent for trial, was that two strips of pictures found in the booth with her. They showed me slitting her throat. Now I spend my days out of my mind on medication in a psych ward. But sometimes, I trick them into thinking I took my medication so that I can think for a while. And I always think back to that day, and I have an idea about it. I think that, sometime, someone else will go into that arcade. They'll find it empty except for the owner sitting there watching a sports game, a couple kids playing games, and a beautiful girl sitting alone in a photo booth. And I wonder, will this person ever leave the arcade?